Hello all, I'm Sai and you're watching The Book Dragon. In today's video, I'm bringing to you my July reading wrap-up. And in July, I managed to read a total of 14 books. It's definitely not been a great reading month for me. It was very mediocre. I'm saying this because all the books that I read were all over the place. Some books were really amazing and they have stuck with me in my heart. And some were like super mediocre that I would have done well without reading them. I read a total of 6 physical books and 8 audiobooks. And I have some exciting videos coming up this week as well. So if you're new here and if you like what you're watching, please do consider subscribing because I'm sure that you will get a lot of benefit out of the time you spend here. So without any further ado, let's get into the books right away. Starting with the physical books, the first book which I finished is The 40 Rules of Love by Elif Shafak. I actually started this in the end of June and continued it on with July, and in the first 2 days I think I finished reading this, so it feels like very long ago. I have a spoiler-free review for this one as well, and if I have spoiler-free reviews for any of the books, I'll let you guys know, as well as they'll be linked down in the description. Now this book is a literary fiction and it also has some aspects of historical fiction as well as mysticism and spirituality that are included into it. I found it beautifully written compared to anything else. The writing of the author was something which I did not feel that much comfortable because it felt a bit too mediocre for me while I started reading the book, but as the story progressed and the story evolved as a whole, the writing of the author also shifted beautifully. We actually deal with 2 stories. The story that we actually see of the 40-year-old woman named Ella and the story that she is reading. The type of writing that the author uses for both the stories is very different, and there's a point where both of these stories actually overlap towards the end. Until reaching that end, I was confused whether to rate this book 4 stars or 5 stars, but the author made an awesome decision in order to conclude the book and present it to us. So while ending the book, it just felt like I read the life story of an actual person rather than just a fictional book. So it's definitely a wonderful book, and I'd highly suggest you to put it on your TBR for the rest of the year because I think it'll be a great read for the monsoon season, and I rated this one 5 stars. The next one is a thriller and it is Wilde Lake by Laura Lippman. Now this was definitely a very disappointing book for me. It is huge. Okay, I spent a lot of time reading this, but I can say that it was totally not worth it because the author did not make use of all the space that she had while narrating the story. It actually deals with this woman who has gotten into the government in the role of her father after her father has retired, and she is good at her job as well. But there is this murder mystery that she solves which interlaces along with her life from the past as well. But the way in which the author handled it was not great if you ask me. We switch in between the past and the present. The past bits of the story is narrated from first person's point of view and the present bit is narrated from third person's point of view. I like the past perspective a lot more because it was from the first person's point of view and it was a bit more well handled compared to the present part. And also I thought that the author spent a lot of time describing the clothes that the characters were wearing rather than developing the plot as a whole. So it was definitely a huge miss for me, and I would have done well without reading this book. So I'd not recommend you guys to try this one. So if you're interested, look it up, and if you find it interesting in some way, you can definitely read it. I rated this one 3 stars. Next we have a classic mystery book, and it is The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now this is the 3rd book in the Sherlock Holmes series chronologically, and it is a collection of 12 short stories. I have a spoiler-free review for this one as well, and I have a Sherlock Holmes playlist. I'll try to link both of them down in the description. You can go and check them out if you're interested. I'm going to continue on with the series as well. So far, of all the 3 books that I've read in the series, this is definitely my most favorite. The best part about this book, if you ask me, is the character development of both Sherlock Holmes as well as Dr. James Watson. The friendship between them was so pure and so beautiful to read about. It is definitely a friendship which I enjoyed reading and I envy to have in my life. It is definitely a kind of friendship in which both the people understand each other totally and trust each other completely. It's not like they agree on every stuff with each other, but when one of the people is trying to put forth their point and try to make the other person understand, both of them are really open to hear the thoughts of the other person and put them into use. And another thing which I liked about the 2 characters is that they respect, admire as well as adore each other really beautifully, and they learn different things from the other person. It's not like one of the 2 friends is an alpha. And since it's a collection of short stories, each and every one was so fast paced and it was really well put together. I'd highly recommend it for beginners also. The language is a bit tough, but I can say that you can easily handle it if you're a beginner as well. So I rated this one 5 stars. The next book which I finished is the final book that I've been reading in the very long Shadowhunter Chronicles, and with this book I have ended reading the series with all the books that have been released until now. I have not read the novelty books alone, so the book that I'm talking about is Ghosts of the Shadow Market by Cassandra, Clare, Rees, Brennan, Maureen Johnson, Kelly Link and Robin Wasserman. Yeah, the book is co-written by 5 different authors, but Cassandra Clare is always the center focus as usual because it's her legacy. And I can say that this was a very enjoyable as well as emotional read for me because I've been traveling with all these characters in these books for almost a year and a half now, and it's been 1 year since I started publishing videos in my Shadowhunter playlist. So definitely the next video in my Shadowhunter playlist is going to be one of the very long awaited videos which many of you guys have asked me for quite a while now, and it is how to read the Shadowhunter Chronicles in different orders. I'll try to publish it as soon as I can. When it comes to this book, it was very enjoyable as well as emotional, just as I said before. It deals with short stories that happen after the end of the Infernal Devices until after the end of the Dark Artifices. So you'll have to have finished all the other Shadowhunter books in order to read this one. Otherwise, you will end up spoiling at least one series when it comes as a whole. So I'd highly suggest you to read this after reading all the other books. And obviously, this was a 5-star read for me. Next book which I finished is The Vanishing Stair by Maureen Johnson. This is the second book in the Truly Devious series. If you've been following me recently, you know that I loved the first book, which is Truly Devious, very much, and I'm very much hyped for this series. The second book was not as good as the first book, but it has a lot of questions from the first book which are answered really well, and it has put forth new questions for the final book. So I'm very much waiting to finish that one. Actually, I plan to finish The Hand on the Wall, which is the third book in the series, also by the end of July itself, but I was not able to because of various reasons. I'm actually currently reading that book, and I'm filming this video on the 1st of August, so by the time you're watching this video, I would have finished reading the third book as well, and I have the fourth book with me, which I'll be reading pretty soon after the third book. Once I finish reading all the 4 books, I'll try to do a spoiler-free review for the entire series until it's published now. So if you are looking out for a good mystery series, I'd highly recommend this one. The first book was super atmospheric. It was the same for the second book as well. While I started reading the book itself, in the first 2 paragraphs, I just got into the place that the author was talking about, and it was very interesting. It was not as great as the first book, just as I said before. It has this Middlebrook syndrome kind of thing, but as a whole, it was a really enjoyable read, and I rated this one 4 stars. The last physical book is the only non-fiction physical book which I read in July, and it is Death and Inside Story by Sadhguru. I have a review for this one as well. You can go and check it out if you're interested. This is totally a spiritual book, so if you are going to read this, you have to go in with a very open mind, and there are some aspects of the book which I'm not sure if I agree with or not, but 75% of the book was super awesome for me, and I got a lot of knowledge while reading this one. It mainly focuses on death and death alone, which is a very taboo topic when it comes to any country and culture across the world. I'm sure that everyone has this fear of talking about death and facing death when it comes to us. I can say that this is a book which tries to make you understand and be comfortable with the concept of death, because just as we live life, we must be able to embrace death when it reaches us and not just get frightened and die in a very bad way. We have to die happily and understanding it really well, because it's going to happen to anyone no matter what we do. We might even live for 100 or 200 years, but at a certain point everyone has to die, and I'm sure that while we read this book, we'll be able to understand death as a concept rather than just a very bad incident that happens to everyone, and I'd highly recommend you to read this if you're interested. I rated this one 4 stars. Moving on to the audiobooks, the first audiobook which I finished is Psycho by Robert Bloch. Now this is a psychotic thriller. It's not even a psychological thriller, because it deals with the story of a psycho that is narrated as a thriller tale. Now in this book, we have a person who lives with his mother. He's 40 years old, and his mother is kind of a control freak, and they both own a hotel in which people come and stay in while they are traveling on the highways, and this hotel also is present on a highway itself, and it is very isolated because all the other buildings in that area have been demolished in order to expand the extent of the highway. And what happens is, one day there's this young woman who has stolen a huge amount of money from her employer, and she escapes. And while she escapes, she finds this motel, and she goes and stays there for the night. While she's staying there, many crazy things start unfolding, and there are multiple shenanigans which go on. It is a thriller as well as a mystery story put together. I can say that I was able to make out what was happening, but I could not guess the climax of the story. But while I reached the climax, it was pretty much satisfactory if you ask me. It definitely has a lot of violence and gore, so if you have some restrictions for yourself in order to read stuff like that, you have to consider that while reading this one. And also, it's a book just under 200 pages long. I think it was just 5 to 6 hours in audiobook length, so it was a quick read for me. I rated this one 4 stars and not 5 stars because I thought that the story might have been expanded and elaborated a lot more with a lot more details in order to make it even more thrilling. So it was definitely a 4-star read for me. The next one is Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx. Now this is a queer book which is happening in the 1950s and 60s, so it is not very common for queer people to get along together. There are 2 main characters who pass out of high school, and they have this small buffer time before getting into their jobs. So they work as shepherds in a mountain region called the Brokeback Mountain, and while they are working together, they form this intimate bond. And so what happens is, after a few days, they get separated and get married off to 2 different women. And after a few years, what happens is they meet again, and all these memories from the past start bubbling up, and it becomes a bit bad for both of them because it's definitely not a healthy situation that's going on. Now if you ask me, this story is one which has a lot of conflict and and a lot of substance to have been explored, but I can say that because of the length of the book, I listened to it on audio, right? So it was not even 1 hour long, so there was not that much that the author did in order to explore the various potentials that the story had, so it was not that much of an investing read for me. So I rated this one 3 stars. The next one is the last fiction audiobook which I listened to, and it is definitely my most favorite fiction audiobook that I've listened to in July, and it is Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. Now, this is the first book in an adult fantasy trilogy, but I can say that this is a book which is super suitable for beginners who are trying to get into reading adult fantasy books. It's definitely not a book that reads like an adult book at all. It is super funny and super hilarious. It deals with these two people, Royce and Hadrian, who are prolific thieves. Okay, they can just steal stuff out of places without leaving any traces of them there, and they get recruited to steal this sword, and many things break out, and because of this we have a whole kingdom that is involved in the plot. It was such a fun, interesting, fast-paced read. Now, actually, this book which I read is a bind-up of 2. It was initially published as 6 books, and after that, Orbit picked it up and published it as 3 books, binding 2 books into 1 each. It's also a really long audiobook. I think it was over 20 hours long, and it took a lot of time for me to complete, but it was so much enjoyable the whole time. It was funny, hilarious, as well as the characters are very much likable. So, if you're interested, please do go and check it out because it was very fun and super engaging. Moving on to the non-fiction books in the audiobook pile, the first book which I finished is How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LePera. I actually listened to this on audio first, and the book was super good that I decided to buy a physical copy of it and read it physically in the upcoming days. Now, this book actually deals with healing from trauma that we have experienced in the past. It might be childhood trauma, it might be trauma that is psychologically induced due to various reasons. I thought that I am not a person that has that much trauma, but while I read this book, I was able to understand that how much of our beliefs are actually rooted from the traumas that we experienced from the past, and there are some things which we don't even consider as trauma when it comes to our culture as a whole. It also deals with handling anxiety in a very healthy way. So there are multiple aspects of this book which just spoke to me truly, and I felt like some paragraphs of the book were specifically written for me. It was that much compelling and that much resonating with me. So I'm definitely going to reread this physically, and there's a type of journaling that the author guides us through in this one called the future self journaling. I'm going to do that as well. So if you're going to buy one book this year, I'd highly recommend you to buy this one and read it. It is definitely a bit expensive than most of the books. I bought it for 416 rupees. I'm sure that it will be expensive for quite a while also. It is a bestseller right now, and I can say that if you read this book, there will be something which gets opened in your mind and you will start making yourself better in some way or the other. So I'd highly recommend you to try this. It's definitely a 5-star read. The next book which I finished is Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson and Kenneth H. Blanchard. Now, this is a book that is non-fiction which conveys its message through a fictional story. I can say that anyone who's a beginner or who's trying to get into self-help books or non-fiction books in general must read this book. Okay, it is also a very tiny book. I think it's not even 100 pages in physical length, and the audiobook was just 2 hours long. I enjoyed it the whole time. It is not even hard to follow, okay? It's just a story that is narrated to us in which we have 2 rats and 2 small human beings, and a tale is narrated to us, how they look for cheese and how they move on to find cheese and what happens if they don't get cheese. The cheese in this one is actually the various things that we deal with in our life, both good as well as bad, and how we have to deal with them. It is definitely a book which is suitable for any age range. So it is definitely a 4-star book. It was not great, but I can say that it is a book which can definitely make your life better and change your thinking into a positive mood. The next book which I finished is How to Think More About Sex by Alain de Botton. Now, this is a book which I found from Ali Abdal's book recommendations, and the way in which he pitched the book was very interesting, so I went forward and checked it out. It's also a very short audiobook. I think it's just 3 or 4 hours in length. On the surface level, okay, on the surface level, this is a book that's just about sex, and I'd say that anyone who's 15, 16 and above can definitely read this book, because in our country we don't have sex education at all, and we have to self-educate ourselves in order to protect us from the various things that are going on around the world. So if you are interested in that kind of stuff, please do go forward and pick this up, because I think it is informative, and I'd highly recommend anyone who's interested in the topic to read this one. It's definitely not a mind-blowing book or anything, but it is very informative, and I rated this one 3 stars. The last audiobook which I finished is a Tamil self-help book, and it is Idliyaaga irungal by Soma Valliappan. Now, this is a book which is, I can say, a summary of emotional intelligence, which is a self-help book in English. Now, I have not read Emotional Intelligence yet, but I'm very much interested in reading that book. But before getting into that one, I wanted to get an idea of what the book was about, and I got the idea of that book from this one, which is Idliyaaga irungal. Now, if you're a person who understands Tamil just like me, or if you're a Tamil person just like me, you can definitely go forward and read this. I think it will be more beneficial for beginners than people who are more into reading self-help books, because it did not have anything that was totally explained to the root level. It is a book that deals with how we can emotionally balance ourselves on the surface level. It does not tap into anything so deep and makes us understand each and everything properly. It was an informative book again, but not mind-boggling or so helpful in any way for me personally. But if you're a beginner, I can say that it will definitely be useful for you, and I rated this one also 3 stars. So yes guys, those are all the 14 books which I read in July, and it was definitely a mixed month for me. I'm expecting a lot from August because I have a lot of great books on my TBR already, and I have also purchased a few books in the past 2 to 3 months, and I'm expecting to get to all of them pretty soon. And if you did enjoy watching today's video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also share it to your friends. If you want to get more content from me, do subscribe to the channel because I publish new videos every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.